The revolution is real, it's live, and as some comrades say, it's lit, right? lit. Real, live, lit. Right? The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. This week, we will resume the history of anti-colonial revolution with a study on the Russian Revolution through the eyes of African internationalism. Taking a look at this revolution sets the proper context for the struggle that the world colonial powers have with Russia today. We'll also receive our overview from Jesse Nevel, chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement and one of the Uhuru Three, being targeted by the US government for working for reparations from the white community to the African community under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. We'll start with an overview, break for announcements, and then hear from Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And before we get started with our formal program, I just want to salute the Uhuru movement, the Hands Off Uhuru campaign, all of the comrades who organized in over 20 different locations throughout the world for the Hands Off Uhuru International Day of Action, demanding the charges be dropped against Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hess, Jesse Nevel, and to defend the right to freedom of speech. We had locations throughout the US, in South Africa, in London, in Jamaica, and comrades were hosting demonstrations, teach-ins, spear sales, tabling, festivals, you name it. People were organizing in their community, raising up this question to drop the charges against the Uhuru Three and against the attack against the Uhuru movement by the FBI, by the US government. So just wanted to salute you, comrades. What a powerful day. And we are not done. This weekend is still continuing. We still have actions, which we'll talk about later today, that you can be connected with, but just wanted to say that. And also, this took place on the anniversary of the founding of the African People's Socialist Party. So not only did we have our International Day of Action, but several different locations also celebrated African Liberation Day, recognizing the 51-year history of the African People's Socialist Party and the leadership of our chairman, Omali Yeshitela. So what a profound day. History, in the making. Just want to salute everybody who was involved in that process. So now, we're going to go back to our scheduled program. And before we start, make sure to like this study and share it far and wide. Take a moment right now to like this video, tag your friends, subscribe to our YouTube channel and to Chairman Omali's Twitch channel. And again, we all know that this government is trying to silence this movement. It has already attacked, the basic democratic principles of freedom of speech. And so we have to do everything that we can to get this study out there, this information out there, the information and the analysis they do not want you to have. So without further ado, let's welcome up Comrade Jesse Nevel to talk to us about the Russian Revolution through the eyes of African internationalism. Uhuru, Jesse, and thank you for joining.
Uhuru Director Akile, thank you so much. It's truly an incredible honor to be on this installment of the Omali Taught Me Sunday study on this series about revolutionary struggles throughout the world. And I want to just deeply salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, the African People's Socialist Party, and this profound political education series that Chairman Omali Yeshitela leads every single Sunday for over a decade, if not more, to bring the political theory of African internationalism to the world. And I also want to salute you, Director Akile, and the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, and just again say what an honor it is to be a part of this program today as a member of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the organization of white people that was formed by the African People's Socialist Party as a strategic front behind enemy lines to organize white solidarity with Black power. I'm very honored to have been asked to participate in presenting this study on the Russian Revolution through the eyes of African internationalism. And I also want to salute Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela, just incredible leader of the African People's Socialist Party, under whose leadership we in the African People's Solidarity Committee have the honor to work. So I'm now going to share my screen. Let me make sure I can do that here. Okay. So this presentation, as Director Akile mentioned, is on the Russian Revolution, but it is not just any study on the Russian Revolution. This is the only way to truly understand the basis for the Russian Revolution, why it happened, how it happened, and ultimately why it failed, which is through the eyes of African internationalism. And this presentation was developed under the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela in the process of creating this study series to look at previous revolutions in the world through the eyes of the revolutionary philosophy of the African working class as developed by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party over the last 50 years. And what distinguishes this study today and our ability to truly understand this revolution and anything that's happening in the world is Chairman Omali Yeshitela's analysis of the colonial mode of production. The colonial mode of production enables us to understand, again, why the Russian Revolution happened, how it happened, and everything that has happened since. The colonial mode of production, as we understand from Chairman Omali Yeshitela, is this process under which all value, goods, and services and life produced for the colonizer, for white people, are created through the oppression, exploitation, and parasitic theft of resources from the colonized. And this colonial mode of production is the basis for the global capitalist economy built on the enslavement and colonization of African people. So this understanding of the colonial mode of production and this lens through which to understand the history of the Russian Revolution also makes clear to us the basis for the origins of the current US and European and NATO war on Russia. That we often hear about how we hear some analysts claiming that the attack on Russia began in 2014 or in 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Chairman Omali Yeshitela helps us understand that it actually began over 100 years ago with the attack on the Russian Revolution. And Chairman, did you want to? No. Oh, okay. So, and just to clarify some terms that we'll be hearing, that the Russian Revolution of 1917 is also referred to as the Bolshevik Revolution. The organization that led the revolution was known as the Bolsheviks, which is a word that means majority, or the Soviet Revolution. And a Soviet is a workers' council. And that's something we'll be talking about later in the study. And as the chairman has explained, the Russian Revolution was an objective threat to world colonial powers that was ushered in by anti-colonial struggle happening in the world at that time. In the period leading up to the Russian Revolution of 1917, the whole colonized world, especially the African world, was on fire. So some of the things that were happening at this time, and again, this is the brilliance of African internationalism and the chairman that connects everything happening in the world. That what happened in Russia was not happening in isolation. What happened in Russia happened in the context of colonized people resisting all around the world, as exemplified by Marcus Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, that rose to prominence with Garvey's famous speech denouncing the brutal massacre of African people in East St. Louis in 1917. During the same time period, 1916, 1917, struggles were heating up in the Middle East, where after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, European powers, France and England, carved up the Middle East, just like they had done in Africa, to create countries like Syria and Lebanon. And in 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, which brought Palestine under a colonial mandate, designating it as a Jewish homeland settler colony. In 1915, the US Marines invade Haiti and continue the imperialist assault on African people in Haiti. Between 1910 and 1920, you had the Mexican Revolution under the leadership of Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata. And in 1917, the struggle for independence by India, for independence from the British Empire, was intensifying with the Indian War of Independence and the demand by the Indian National Congress for self-government for India. So all of this is happening during that time frame. And as the chairman explains, as colonized people are resisting, World War I, as it's often referred to, or as the chairman correctly characterizes it, the first imperialist war, World War, broke out between colonizers fighting to redivide the world. And this is a quote from the chairman, who said, "It was during this era that the imperialists created the League of Nations to attempt to maintain peace between the colonizers, the League of Nations being the precursor to the United Nations, negotiating the redivision of conquered lands among the different imperialist powers of the world." And that's very clarifying that, you know, like the chairman said, we are taught in US history classes that there was the shot heard around the world from Archduke Ferdinand. Somehow that was the thing that sparked World War I. But the chairman clarifies that it was actually sparked by an imperialist contest between European powers to redivide the world in response to the resistance and struggle of colonized people during that time period. And the Russian revolutionaries, under its leadership, Vladimir Lenin, broke with the rest of the European socialist establishment and Europe as a whole by calling for Russia to refuse to participate in this imperialist war to redivide the world. And that was something that put Russia on a trajectory different from the rest of Europe. And that was a key factor in the emergence of the Russian Revolution. So we just wanted to start off with that incredibly important context provided by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and African Internationalism. And we're going to go now through a step-by-step process of what unfolded within Russia leading up to the Russian Revolution of 1917. So we're going to come back to the first imperialist war later on. But now we're going to go to the mid-1800s. So prior to the revolution, Russia was not, as the chairman explains, Russia was not part of the slave trade, the assault on the so-called slave trade, the enslavement of African people, and colonialism around the world that built the rest of Western Europe. So Russia was not part of the global colonial capitalist economy in that way. And prior to the Russian Revolution, Russia was under feudalism, which meant that the majority of the Russian people, the vast majority of Russians, were deeply impoverished at that time and were peasants tied to the land owned by the nobility. And under Russian feudalism, the serfs were bound to the land for their entire lifetime. And the Russian peasants during this time period were constantly struggling and resisting in response to starvation and scarcity. The Russian peasants revolted again and again, and each time they were violently put down by what was known as the Tsar. And the Tsar was the emperor of Russia. And the word Tsar actually comes from the word Caesar. And this was the Tsar at the time frame that we're talking about, Tsar Alexander II. So in response to all of these struggles that were happening, in 1861, Tsar Alexander II formally abolishes feudalism. He claims that feudalism is now over in Russia, but of course that wasn't true. Nothing actually changed. And the Tsar and the nobility continued to own all the land in Russia, and the Russian masses continued to exist in semi-feudal oppression under that system. So eventually the struggles got to a point where they actually assassinated Tsar Alexander II, who was, again, very brutal. And a group of anarchists threw a bomb at his feet in 1881 and ended his life. But he was replaced by Tsar Alexander III, who, as you can see here, was not much better. And he intensified the reign of terror against the Russian people and basically made any revolutionary activity illegal and forced all the revolutionary organizations to go underground. And it was uncovered by, at some point, that Lenin's brother was allegedly involved in the plot to assassinate the previous Tsar. So Vladimir Lenin's brother was hanged for treason by the Tsarist regime. So over the next decade under the Tsar, things continue getting worse and worse for the Russian people. The Russian government attempts to industrialize Russia and create a small working class and try to create factories. And the conditions for the Russian workers are pretty much the same as the conditions for the Russian peasants. And hundreds of thousands of people die. There's famines, there's crop failures, and things just continue to be very devastating for the majority of people in Russia. And then Russia suffers a humiliating military loss in a war with Japan in 1904, 1905, which further turns the Russian people against the government and the Russian ruling class. So this leads up to the first of 3 revolutions that happen in Russia over the next 12 years that culminates in the Russian Revolution of 1917. So I always thought this was very interesting that 1905, there's all this struggle happening in Russia. And by the way, even though we don't mention him until later, Lenin was already very active at this time, organizing and working to, develop theory and organization to organize the Russian masses for revolution. But the Russian people in general were in a state of unrest. And in an attempt to misdirect and pacify the Russian people, the Russian government basically sends out this priest named Father Gapone to lead the Russian people in a big protest and basically, prevent it from going too far. So they have this basically like sellout kind of pastor, Father Gapone, who leads this big march of Russian protesters to the Winter Palace, which was the seat of government in Petrograd. But nonetheless, the Tsarist police couldn't help themselves and still opened fire on them and ended up slaughtering 300 Russian people and injuring hundreds more. And that became known as the Bloody Sunday Massacre in 1905. And that was, again, considered kind of the spark for the next 2 major revolutionary uprisings that happened over the next decade or so. So at this point, Nicholas II here is the Tsar, and this is the last Tsar of Russia. So we're getting close to the revolution here. And after he comes to power, he's trying to figure out a way to placate the Russian people. So he forms a parliamentary government in Russia called the Duma and gives some rights to the Russian citizens, but it proves to be nothing more than empty gestures. He's just basically changing the face of the Tsarist regime, but continuing the same brutal oppression of the people. And just to give you a little glimpse into what was going on within the Russian ruling class at that time, they were immersed in metaphysical idealism. This was one of Tsar Nicholas II's closest political advisors. He was a Russian mystic named Rasputin. And I mean, that just gives you some indication of where the Russian ruling class was at ideologically, that he was consulting with a mystic on a sometimes daily basis for political advice. So Nicholas II takes Russia into the First Imperialist War, and it was very catastrophic, and many Russian people were against the war and against Russia's involvement in the war. So that just continued to foster discontent on the Russian masses against the Tsar. And then things really came to a boiling point in February of 1917 on International Women's Day. Women workers in Petrograd left the factories and took to the streets in protest, and nearly 100,000 women marched and chanted, "Bread, down with the autocracy, stop the war." And the next day, 150,000 men and women workers joined the demonstrations and basically shut down Petrograd. And this is considered a pivotal moment in the unfolding of the Russian Revolution. That a couple days later, these demonstrations just continue, and there's hundreds of thousands of people. And what happened was the police and the soldiers are sent to put down the resistance the same way they did in 1905. But this time, instead of shooting the people, they join them and they side with the masses, and they join the demonstrations against the Tsar. So that's a very bad situation for the Tsar. So he steps down. So Tsar Nicholas II is out of power at this point. And this becomes known as the February Revolution, where the monarchy, the Tsar, is out of the picture, but not entirely. And he's been replaced by a bourgeois democracy. So this was not a socialist revolution. This was basically, okay, the Tsar is gone, so now there can be elections and have some kind of bourgeois democracy. So that's why they call it a bourgeois democratic revolution. And under this new bourgeois democracy, there was a provisional government that was formed in Russia, which was led by this guy, Alexander Kerensky. He became the prime minister. And this was basically, liberals and opportunists and petty bourgeois forces that came together to constitute the new government of Russia now that the Tsar was gone. And they did certain things like abolish the death penalty and give amnesty for political prisoners, but did not really do anything major. Like, they did not end Russia's involvement in the war. They did not turn the land over to the peasants, and they did not address the overall conditions faced by Russian workers and peasants. So it was basically, they did not represent the Russian workers and peasants. Who represented the Russian workers and peasants were the Soviets. And again, the word Soviet means Workers' Council. And what was happening at that time that, we understand this concept of dual power from Chairman Amalia Shatella, that what was happening while the provisional government was in there, the socialists under Lenin were building a power of the people that was equal, if not greater, in influence to that of the provisional government by forming Soviets or workers' councils all throughout Russia. And the largest Soviet was in Petrograd, the capital at that time, which was the center of the Soviet movement. And again, they established dual and contending power. They established worker-controlled organizations that existed at the expense of the power of the provisional government. And the Bolsheviks, which was the political formation led by Lenin, led the Petrograd Soviet. And Lenin had been there all along, struggling for revolution in Russia and fighting against line differences within the communist movement at that time. And in many ways, it reminds us of the incredible leadership of Chairman Amalia Shatella, just the fierce and unrelenting way that Lenin struggled against opportunism in the movement at that time. He was constantly waging struggles for revolutionary theory and organization, like Chairman Amalia Shatella today. So the Petrograd Soviet was headed up by another Russian revolutionary named Leon Trotsky. And when the February Revolution took place, so again, when the Women's Day March happens and the police join the demonstration, the Tsar leaves, they form this bourgeois democracy. Lenin was actually in exile at that time. And I know the chairman can tell us a lot more about this and deepen the significance of this particular chapter in the story. While he was in exile, he wrote this document called the April Theses that became the program of the Bolshevik Party. And he called for down with the provisional government and all power to the Soviets. So the Soviets are building power at that time, and he's saying the Soviets should seize power and get rid of the provisional government. And he gets on a train to come back to Russia from Switzerland during that time. And also in 1917, Lenin writes the book, The State and Revolution, in which he argues for the seizure of state power by the Soviets or the dictatorship of the working class, as opposed to a bourgeois democracy. So this was also really important thing that Lenin was articulating. So when Lenin gets back to Russia, he is embraced by the masses. He's greeted by tens of thousands of Russian workers at the train station. And he speaks to the workers. He jumps up on the top of a car and makes a speech to the workers saying, saluting them for ousting the Tsar and just congratulating the people on this great victory. But then a few hours later, he comes back out and makes another speech denouncing the provisional government and calling for a socialist revolution and raising up the demand for peace, land, and bread, because the Russians wanted out of the First Imperialist War. So that was peace. The peasants wanted the land. So that was land. And the people were starving and had no economic prosperity or control over their resources. So that was encapsulated in the demand for bread. And the fact that these demands were raised exposed the fact that the provisional government had failed to address them, just like the Tsar. I also think it's worth noting the Russian left was against Lenin. And when he presented the April Theses to the left establishment in Russia, he was booed by the majority of the participants, and a prominent Russian leftist at that time referred to his ideas as the ravings of a madman. Lunatic fringe, as the chairman said, exactly. But nonetheless, Lenin and the Bolsheviks were hard at work, and they were organizing amongst the Russian people. And Lenin fought for the Bolshevik Party to function as a tightly organized, strictly disciplined vanguard party of the Russian workers. Career chairman.
Yeah. Uhuru. Yeah, I just think it's very important what we've been looking at up to now. And part of what we should understand is that this revolution didn't just occur in some straight line, some trajectory, without various kinds and assortment of contradictions raging all the time. And we're looking at a period where part of what was occurring is you have all these people who consider themselves Marxists, many of them, some of them who are part of what would be the Revolutionary National Democratic, how was it characterized? The Russian
Social Democrats.
It was a whole movement inside Russia itself of people who consider themselves Marxists and communists and revolutionaries. And some of them were like the Social Democrats, like the party that Lenin was a part of. Then that party had split early on into what was called a minority faction and a majority faction. And it was because Lenin was struggling for a certain kind of organization, a certain kind of party that was comprised essentially of really dedicated cadre forces who understood that despite the fact that people were talking about democracy and what have you, there were conditions under which the revolution had to succeed, and it couldn't succeed unless it was an organization led primarily by cadre, by forces who would withstand everything and who would be trained to make the revolution. And there was a question when they were talking about the consolidation of this party of what the requirements for membership would be. And the position that was out there that was the membership that should be people who paid their dues, should be members and proclaim their loyalty to socialism or something to that effect. And Lenin said, no, that's not good enough.
Right.
You got to pay the dues. They got to, be Marxist or social, but they also have to participate in an organization under the leadership of the party.
Right.
They got to be an organization. This was a fundamental difference that Lenin, and that was the thing that split them and the minority of that position as it came to be known, although it wasn't always the minority. A lot of political maneuvering happened. That's the Mensheviks. Mm-hmm. And then there was the Bolsheviks who united with Lenin. And the Bolsheviks were those, who had, really serious kind of political line, and that was driving this process that we're talking about now. But even within the Communist Party, even within the Bolshevik movement, there were questions about Lenin, where Lenin was trying to take the revolution. So because there was this assumption under Marxism that socialism happened as a consequence of ongoing development of what they characterize as not socialism, but communism, as human development. And this went through these stages, right? And you could not have this communism until what? After you went through capitalism. Right. But Russia was not a capitalist country, even though there was the emergence of some capitalist functioning. Capitalism has developed, it becomes highly developed kind of situation. Then you have the emergence of communism. That was a traditional Marxist understanding. That hadn't happened. So you had even people who were part of Lenin's organization, the Bolsheviks, said you can't take power now. You got to go through capitalism first. And Lenin said, take it, take it. And so even when they had this democratic process with Kerensky and all of these other places where they're going to now have capitalism coming into, Bolsheviks were hesitant to seize power. They were hesitant to do that, even part of his party and part of the whole communist world and part of all of the communists, most of the communists in Russia. And so Lenin said that we have to take power. The other thing that Lenin had done is that he had been arguing within the whole communist movement, which was white movement, generally speaking, throughout the world, that we could see the war coming, just like you see the possibilities, the likelihoods of this war that's happening already. It's already unfolding, developing to a full-fledged thing. Lenin was saying, look, that we have to have a position of turning this war into civil war, so that it's not the workers don't become just like these fodder to be wiped out by different sectors of the international ruling class in their own interest to further the interests of capital. We got to use this to make the revolution, overturn the whole capitalist social system, instead of coming up with defense of the fatherland, which is what a general line that had begun to emerge, that each of the countries, instead of these so-called communists being committed to the elevation of the workers of the world, et cetera, they're going to fight in the interests of their capitalist bosses, their ruling class, their country. So they say, we get in this war, fight this war to defend the fatherland, defend Russia, defend Germany, defend all these other things. And Lenin was saying, the hell with that. No, no, no. And so what happened is that Lenin had made the statement, they had cleared part of his line to the Russian people is that we come to power, we've taken Russia out of the war, right, ending the war. That was something that Germany wanted to hear, because Germany was in part of this whole war, and they needed Russia to be a part of this war too, we needed Russia out of the war. Germany wanted Russia out of the war. And remember, this is a war of bandits, international bandits going to redivide the world. So Lenin was able to make a deal with the Germans that put Lenin in a train with when the window seal is called a sealed car. Lenin and his delegation to get them from, was it Switzerland he was in, back to back so that he could get into Russia, and they ended up in Finland. Finland has been in the news lately, right? So to get into Finland, which is right on the border of Russia. And the train to Finland is what it was called. And because Lenin was in this train, nobody could see the train because the windows were sealed. You couldn't see who was in there. That was the deal. They had this whole car to themselves. That's the train that Jesse has just taken us to when they get to the station in Finland. And so now you got these forces. You got all kinds of forces. You got liberals, you got different sectors of the communists, you got anarchists, you got all these forces vying for power at the same time. It's not just Lenin and the communists. And so in the Soviets, you have all these factions in the Soviets as well. Trotsky played a major role in development. He was an incredibly important force in a certain way at that time. And so you had this process unfolding, and Lenin, with a core of cadre, dedicated forces, he said, let's go into the Soviets with all these other forces, because he's convinced that if you hold on to the line, we are the best organization in the world, we're the best organization in there, we can take it. We can go and be with anybody we want to be. Hold the political line, understanding that we have, be disciplined in the process, carry out the strategy, and we can win in the Soviets, even though the Soviets had all kinds of people in there who were not members of the Communist Party or the Bolsheviks and stuff like that. And they did. They were successful in doing that, leading everything. That was the objective. To be able to go upon masses and mass organizations, mass institutions as a dedicated cadre force, and then provide the leadership to take it where you need to be. And so he called for a dual power, because he said that the Soviets had already become a dual power. This is even despite the fact that the Bolsheviks hadn't taken on everything. They were beginning in these Soviets where you had workers, you had Soviet military forces who were all part of this. And the government trying to say this and that happened. The Soviets disagree. They did something else, because they were the ones who were the workers. They were the ones who controlled the railroads and other kinds of stuff like that, so they could make decisions independent of the government. Right. This was a dual power. And so, and Lenin recognized this as a dual power, right? And so he said, all power to the Soviets, even though there were people who wanted to go along with this reformist government, even in his own organization that helped come into being with Kerensky and the cadets, as they were characterized at that time. So anyway, that's the kind of thing that I think is really important for us to understand. These things happen, but you had a dynamic revolutionary force under the leadership of Lenin. Even that organization was split because some of them went and snitched. Two of the members of the Central Committee, when Lenin had planned to take power, to seize power within a certain time frame, they went and told the authorities that they planned to take power on such and such a day. That was how serious the disagreements were inside that organization. So it was not just that simple thing that happened. There were struggles that were rolling all along, or in the organization, between the organization and other forces, and between the Russian revolutionaries and white socialists in other places around the world and in Europe. This is what's established that. And I'm saying this because we find ourselves often in the same kind of situation, have to contend with the same kind of forces, building the same kind of revolutionary organization, because that's what it takes if you're interested in taking power. This is what the Russian thing is about. It's not Facebook. It's not getting friends and likes that you will never meet in your life if you live long enough. Or will have any kind of impact on actually trying to take power. And if you're not talking about power, then you're just wasting time and social media spaces. How much you call them, gigabytes? You're just wasting gigabytes if you're not talking about power. So that's the objective. And I just wanted to say that it's really important for us to understand that. And the road to power is not just some smooth road. It's rocky as hell. Lenin had to come from Switzerland. He was in exile because they were going to put him in jail. And there were others who were in exile, and many of them had to sneak back into the country to participate in this revolutionary project. They were under FBI indictment. At the time, unindicted, but they were out there, and the government was trying to get them. So this is, I think, something that's important for us to understand. I just wanted to make that comment. And finally, I want to say this, because here's a profound weakness that Lenin and all of them had to deal with. This assumption that they were going to have this communism that came as a consequence of what they did. Lenin said, seize power now. There were others who say, you can't seize power now because you have to go through the capitalist revolution. The thing that was really important is that the Marxist pronouncement, understanding was that the communism was a mode of production that came as a consequence of the development of capitalism. Communism comes as a mode of production. And he didn't just say that. He said he came up with his view of the development of human society. not white people's society, not Russian society, human society. This was supposed to be something that was representative of how society development for human beings, which was something that minimized or even neutralized or even negated or the existence of Africans and other people in the world who were trying to make revolution. He mentions us from time to time, but not as central factors. He mentions us as factors that contributed to the advent of human society, to the changes in human society, which was white. That was he didn't say white. I'm not into this thing about Marx was a racist. That's garbage. Even the concept of racism and stuff like that is relatively new. But what I'm saying is that because the method of investigation and analysis that they used in the starting place for this investigation was one that centered on the development of what would be characterized as Europe, or where white people were, and et cetera. That was the thing that I think is really important. So by the time they get to trying to make this revolution, and the assumption is that once you reach the communism, you don't go back in history. When you go to capitalism, you don't go back, even though you might come into a mode of production that carries with it some of the features of the preceding mode of production. But you have to start off, with this. When you start off with this notion that, as they did with their rise of capitalism, represented development for human society, it wasn't development for human society, it was development for Europe at the expense of human society, at the expense of everybody else. And this was the trap they were in. So they get to this place, and then Lenin is saying that he had to make this concession later on. Jesse's going to talk about it, that we haven't reached the communism we're looking for now. Even after they take part, we haven't reached this communism now. It's going to take what? It's going to take this development. First of all, it said within days, within weeks, there are going to be other industrialized capitalist countries that would join this revolutionary project that would take us to communism. Didn't happen yet, right? Anyway, that's what I want to say. Come here, Jesse. Uhuru. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman, for that important intervention and deepening all of this history and why it is so relevant. And just really, really appreciate what you just laid out, Chairman. And that provides such an excellent foundation for the rest of the presentation that puts it all in context of what we're going to be looking at. So just really want to appreciate that intervention again from Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And just to continue with the next part of this slideshow here. So here we go. Okay, so the chairman just mentioned this actually, that as part of this creation of dual power, the Bolsheviks were consolidating state power. They were consolidating Red Army units. This is, again, before the revolution succeeds. They're forming Red Army units, soldiers under their leadership that was overseen by Leon Trotsky. And as the chairman mentioned, the Red Army soldiers were part of how the Soviets were exercising power independently of the provisional government. And they did this by seizing territory and seizing control of communications apparatuses. So by October 25th, the Bolsheviks deployed Red Army soldiers throughout Petrograd. They took control of the telegraph. They took control of the power stations. They took control of bridges, the post office, train stations, banks, and without firing a single bullet, liberated all of that territory within the city of Petrograd. And the only part of Petrograd by that point that was not liberated was the Capitol building, where the provisional government was headquartered, the Winter Palace. So they started heading there. And this is where this thing called the October Revolution, which again is another word for the Bolshevik Revolution, the Soviet Revolution, the Russian Revolution, really takes place as the Bolsheviks and the Russian people head to the Winter Palace. Alexander Kerensky flees, and the Bolsheviks take control of the Winter Palace and declare the end of the provisional government and declare all power to the Soviets. And immediately announce Bolshevik policy that the new Soviet government would end Russia's involvement in the First Imperialist War, abolish all private land ownership, and grant workers control of the factories. So this was immediately announced by the newly established Soviet government. And as the chairman has been deepening throughout this, that this was all propelled into reality by the Bolshevik position on refusing to participate in the first imperialist war that we talked about earlier, a war between imperialists to redivide the world. And I mentioned earlier that when the provisional government came to power, the Tsar stepped down, but he was still there. So the Bolsheviks took care of that. This was the last picture ever taken of them. And Lenin eradicated any traces of the Tsarist regime left over because he knew that they would try to come back to power and they had to be taken out entirely. So they were swiftly imprisoned and executed on July 4th of 1918, the 4th of July. So Russia withdraws from the first imperialist war. And then this is the moment that the chairman always talks about where the US and European imperialist war against Russia really begins. So again, it didn't start last year. It didn't start in 2014 with the coup in Ukraine. It didn't start in 1991. It started over 100 years ago with the Russian Revolution, with Russia backing out or withdrawing from the first imperialist war. And then immediately the world imperialist powers encircle Russia and start basically an invasion of Russia. And they do it through a force known as the White Army. So this period is referred to as the Russian Civil War because it was Russians who were loyal to the revolution, who were known as the Reds, and then these, reactionary forces that were backed by the US and Europe, who were known as the Whites, the White Russians. So the Red Army versus the White Army, and the White Army viciously attacked the socialist revolution. And it consisted of czarists, liberals, and other opportunists, and the foreign imperialist powers of Britain, France, the United States, and Japan. And the onslaught by world imperialism against Russia was vicious. And the Bolsheviks had to basically put everything. So here they are, they just made a revolution. They're trying to build socialism. And now they have to put all their resources towards their military because they're being encircled by the imperialist powers of the world. So Lenin called this war communism, that basically now all of the people and all of the resources of the revolution had to be mobilized in defense of the revolution against this imperialist invasion in 1918. So this severely undermined the Soviet process and basically decimated the Russian economy and frustrated the process that they had put in place. They were trying to turn factories over to the workers. They were trying to get rid of any czarist military commanders that were still around. They were trying to take the petty bourgeoisie out of the factories and empower the workers to run the factories. But now, because of this invasion, they had to undo a lot of that. They had to bring back some of the czarist military rank into the military. They had to bring back some of the petty bourgeoisie to run the factories. And then, as the chairman mentioned, they also had to basically bring back some form of capitalist enterprise or private ownership of the means of production in Russia and depart from the project of building socialism and say that, and Lenin called it state capitalism. So this was the official policy now of the Russian Revolution almost a few years after it takes place, because it has been immediately attacked by imperialism. It is now on a course of attempting to build state capitalism through the new economic policy. So that's pretty much, there's way more that obviously about the Russian Revolution, including the Second Imperialist War and all the way leading up to the so-called Cold War, and then the ultimate collapse, the destruction of the Soviet Union, that we don't have time to go into today. But we chose to end there because it shows you how almost immediately an honest struggle to build socialism was severely undermined and ran into profound limitations because of the fact that it was still taking place in the context of the colonial mode of production, which had not been overturned. And this brings us to the most important conclusion about the Russian Revolution that has been provided by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, that African liberation is the key to the true emergence of socialism. And the contradictions faced by the Soviet Revolution are evidence of why it is impossible to build socialism without what the chairman calls the existence of the historical condition for the advent of socialism, which is African liberation. You can't have socialism without African liberation at the center. And the next few slides, I'm going to quote from the political report to the 5th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party that the chairman wrote in 2010, which gave an incredible analysis of why this happened in Russia, why it ran into these limitations in building socialism, and explaining that these contradictions stem from the fact that the political conditions, as the chairman says, the political conditions for socialists to come to power existed, but the historical conditions for the advent of socialism did not. And that capitalism was born of imperialism. This is something that the chairman has further deepened with the understanding of the colonial mode of production, but that Lenin, like Marx before him, did not understand that capitalism was born of imperialism, and that capitalism was as a world system was born from and sustained by the enslavement and colonization of Africa and African people, what the chairman has defined now as the colonial mode of production. So because Lenin did not understand this, as the chairman mentioned earlier, instead, he was looking for revolution to happen in Europe. He knew that socialism could not happen just in Russia alone, but he thought that what would rescue the revolutionary project in Russia would be the spread of socialist revolution in the rest of Europe, in Germany and other European countries. And that didn't happen. Revolution did not spread throughout Europe. So in order to explain how Russia would continue to try to build socialism in its own country, even though there wasn't revolution happening all throughout Europe, Joseph Stalin, who became the leader of the Soviet Union after the death of Lenin, he put forward an idea called socialism in one country to justify their attempt to build socialism, despite the fact that it was isolated to Russia by that point. But African internationalism shows that there can't be socialism in one country within the colonial mode of production. And now I'm just going to read to close this out, this very profound quotation from Chairman Omali Yeshitela's political report to the 5th Congress, where the chairman wrote that capitalism was born as a world economy, and the Russian, Chinese, and Cuban revolutions did not change the fact that their countries and economies existed within a pervasive capitalist world economy. Therefore, although those revolutions, contending with semi-feudal, semi-colonial, and neo-colonial economies, were able to make rapid short-term changes in the lives of the workers and toiling masses, they soon ran into their limitations as oases within a sea of capitalist predators. The fundamental contradiction, the resolution of which would result in the historically based advent of socialism, has never existed between the industrial white working class and ruling class. The real locus of the class contradiction in the real world exists in the conflict between the capitalism born as a world system, or the colonial mode of production, and the pedestal upon which it rests. Hence, the 1917 revolution in Russia, the chairman continues, was not a true socialist revolution, since the real historical basis for socialism, which is the destruction of the pedestal upon which capitalism rests and which is required for its existence, had not occurred. What happened in Russia in 1917 was the existence of conditions which constituted the political basis for socialists to seize state power. However, this seizure of state power by socialists did not change the reality that the world economy, even the world economy within which Russia existed, was and continues to be a capitalist world economy. It is the same world economy created by the slave trade and augmented by other facets of parasitic primitive accumulation that transformed the vast majority of the world into great reservoirs of human and material resources, largely for European and North American exploitation. While the Russians, East Europeans, and Chinese have in the past referred to themselves as socialist states, they have never actually presided over socialist economies, the historic basis for the existence of which continues to unfold even now. Therefore, the crises experienced by any or all of these economies have actually been crises inherent in capitalism and not in socialism. Moreover, the political crises experienced by any or all of these states are crises due in great measure to the inability of a capitalist economy to solve the problems in society. And to conclude, the African Socialist International, which was built by Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, the practical expression of African internationalism, uniting African workers on every continent, provides Africans and the world with the first step in the creation of a real communist international that for the first time encompasses the enlightened participation of the vast majority of the toiling masses of the world. And again, that is from Chairman Omali Yeshitela's political report to the 5th Congress, One People, One Party, One Destiny. So I just wanted to again say what a profound honor it has been to participate in this study and salute the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the revolutionary political theory of African internationalism, which makes it possible for us to truly understand the world and history and the future through the eyes of the African working class. And close by saying that the road to socialism is painted black. And as the chairman has written, workers of the world unite under the banner of African internationalism. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Comrade Jesse, and also Uhuru and salute to Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who we'll hear from in just a moment, but want to just say what a profound presentation that was and the context that African internationalism provides around every single question. I mean, it's extremely helpful in terms of being able to just explain everything that we see going on in the world, even right now. And that, you know, this thing that the US government is waging in terms of a proxy war with Russia today has its roots in this whole process that has just been explained. And so they don't say that in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or on CNN, you know, that this is the historical basis for what's occurring right now. And that also this analysis comes from the African working class. It is African internationalism developed by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. We're quoting from the political report to the 5th Congress, you know, which is just is a part of a culmination of work and study that the chairman had done, you know, up until that point and has continued to do. The theory of African internationalism, which has continued to advance. And that, you know, we saw how in the process of African internationalism being the theory that helps to explain the world and even helps to explain the errors of the Russian Revolution, that why would we need with this incredible, powerful theory that explains the world and, you know, corrects our whole view of how this whole thing came into being? Why would the author of African internationalism, how could it ever be possible, these bogus charges that have been made against this movement and the chairman, you know, it can't stand up. The fact is that this is the history, this is the development of the theory of the African working class to forward, you know, true socialism, you know, in the world. This is how we've explained it, how it's going to come into existence. And so nobody else could tell us that or come to these conclusions. And so, again, we can look at this history, look at presentations like this and know that we are our own liberators. We have assumed that task a long time ago to free Africa and African people. And the theory of African internationalism was developed as a consequence of making that a reality. So I want to just appreciate that presentation that Comrade Jesse just gave, and that there has been an overwhelming amount of comments right now coming in from all of you who are watching, who have just saluted this presentation, have appreciated just the history, the education that's coming with the presentation that was just given. It was really profound. So thank you, comrades Jesse, and again to the chairman, who we'll hear from in just a moment. But I do want to take just a quick break to give some announcements so you know what's upcoming in the Uhuru movement. So as you know, we have launched the counteroffensive to stop the FBI attacks on the African People's Socialist Party and the African liberation struggle. You can donate or volunteer to the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa Defense Campaign today. And for more information, go to handsoffuhuru.org to volunteer, donate, sign the petition, and sign the emergency response pledge. And I mentioned that on yesterday, May 27th, we embarked on the International Day of Action, where we had actions in over 20 different locations throughout the world, including in South Africa, in London, in Jamaica, and throughout the United States. This is, we raised up the International Day of Action and the demand to drop the charges against the Uhuru 3. And this work continues even today. As part of the International Days of Action that began on yesterday, you can join a demonstration to demand drop the charges on the Uhuru 3. It takes place today at 4 p.m. in St. Petersburg, Florida City Hall, the historic location of the famous mural struggle initiated by Chairman Amalia Shatella in 1966. City Hall is located at 175 5th Street North in St. Petersburg, Florida. And speakers include myself, Jake Yakov with the Progressive People's Action, Chris Lee Carpio with the USF Tampa 5, students and staff from USF Tampa that were attacked by campus police for protesting Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' book banning, Ruth from the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Jennifer Sullivan from the Hernando County Green Party. So you can visit handsoffahuru.org/action for more details on this action in St. Petersburg, Florida. Join the African People's Solidarity Committee for a special web event titled Solidarity Will Not Be Silenced. Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa. It will feature an interview with APSC Chair Penny Hess and Uhuru Solidarity Movement Chair Jesse Nevel. They are two of the Uhuru 3 being targeted by the U.S. government for working for reparations from the white community under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Tune in to learn how you can stand with other white people under the leadership of the African Revolution and why it is more important than ever that we do stand up right now to push back these attacks and support Uhuru movement programs for Black self-determination. You can register for this event at tinyurl.com/solidarity not silenced. Every Thursday at 8 p.m. Central Africa time, tune in live for the Hands Off Uhuru, Hands Off Africa, Africa Region broadcast, and watch and follow on Facebook at facebook.com/APSP Africa Region. The basic day-to-day work of every party member, APSC member, and organizer within the Uhuru movement is to sell the Burning Spear newspaper. The June issue is here. Purchase a bundle of 25, 50, 100, or more to sell in your community. Go to theburningspear.store where you can order a one-time or recurring bundle. And announcing the new book coming this June titled The Verdict Is In, Reparations Now. This is the 40th anniversary edition of the report from the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations to African People, including a foreword by Loezi Kinshasa, additional testimonies, and an epilogue by Chairman Amalia Shatella. You can pre-order your copy now at theburningspear.store. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating at paypal.me/Omali Taught Me. Uhuru Tours and Speakers Bureau is an institution of the African People's Socialist Party that coordinates events and tours for Chairman Amalia Shatella and other party speakers and leaders. Book Chairman Amalia and other Uhuru movement speakers for your campus or organization now. And as we do the launch of the Verdict Is In, Reparations Now book, you definitely want to get involved with organizing a tour stop for the chairman to talk about this book. And again, this is going to be launching in June, so the schedule is going to fill up pretty quickly. So if you want to bring Chairman Amalia Shatella to your campus, your organization, then email us at info@uhurutours.com or call 727-914-3621. And for more events that have not been mentioned here, you can go to theburningspear.com/events to see everything that we're doing in the Uhuru movement and how you can get involved. And lastly, I want to just say that what was stated at the end of this presentation, that the road to socialism is painted black, that the African People's Socialist Party is the vanguard organization that's ushering in true socialism under the leadership of the African working class. As anti-colonial revolution that this organization is in the process of building, has been in the process of organizing for 51 years, and we will continue. This is the cadre that Chairman Amalia Shatella has spoken of, the cadre that was needed to carry out the Russian Revolution. It is the African People's Socialist Party, the leader of the African Revolution. So join the African People's Socialist Party today at apspuhuru.org. That will conclude our announcement section. And now I have the honor of bringing back up the leadership of the African nation and the worldwide African Revolution, Chairman Amalia Shatella. Uhuru Chairman, thank you for joining us today.
Uhuru. Thank you, Comrade Director Akile. And I want to really give a special thanks to Comrade Jesse Nevel, who leads this incredible mass organization, Uhuru Solidarity Movement, under the leadership of the party, that has established active members of white people who are from the colonizer nation in more than 140 cities throughout this country, carrying out the mission to struggle against colonialism from within the colonizer population itself, and providing for the colonizer, the white people, if you will, and an escape from this relationship, an escape that will contribute to their own emancipation, connected to and in solidarity with emancipation, the liberation of the peoples of the world. And that's really consistent with what we've talked about up to now in terms of what Lenin was involved in. We mentioned how the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian Revolution, that is the thing that has been characterized by many Marxists and many Marxist-Leninists and others as the real beginning of the struggle for capitalism. This understanding misses the point, misses the boat. The fact is that the Russian Revolution was influenced and informed by the first imperialist world war. The first imperialist world war was fought for the same thing that most wars have been fought for since the actual initiation of the colonial project, of how what has now come to be known as Europe was consolidated as through enslavement of African people, the forced dispersal of African people around the world, the attack on indigenous peoples in the Americas in particular, and how this is the thing that gave a common identity to most of the people who live in the world in many ways, certainly a common definition. It's the thing that gave a common identity to people who are now who are now characterized as European. My initial statement was going to be who are now in this place called Europe, but it's more than the people who are in the place called Europe, because the place called Europe became so defined in part through people who were living there, going to places like what is now called Australia, New Zealand, Canada, these places. This is part of the consolidation of a mode of production. It's a mode of production. And the reason it hasn't been able to recognize up to now as such is because the ones who were doing the defining were themselves part of this colonial project. And I'm not talking again about how people perceive themselves. That's not the fundamental issue. And some people get confused around that, whether white people really like us or whether white people this and that. I'm not talking about how people perceive themselves. I'm talking about how they're located within a particular structure of a world economy that came into existence through the enslavement of Africans and the vast majority of the people of the world, thrusting the rest of us, most of us, into a state of perpetual poverty and oppression and exploitation on the one hand, and some of us as beneficiaries of this relationship. And that's what we're talking about, a relationship. And it's not a relationship that's obvious to many people. We can see we live in the same cities within the United States as an example. And the white people over there and the black people over there, and the relationship is not something that's easily understood. And it gets defined for us by forces with an interest in keeping us from recognizing the relationship, because the relationship requires a host and a parasite. This is a relationship we're talking about. You can't just have a parasite by itself. There's no such thing as a parasite living in isolation. It has to have a host. So the host and the parasite constitute a relationship. So when we talk about a colonial mode of production, we're not just talking about something that simply benefits white people. We're talking about a process within which all of the people in society participate in achieving how we live, how we acquire what it is necessary for our existence. And this is a horribly distorted and horribly parasitic kind of relationship. There cannot be such a thing as a slave master without a slave. There can't be anything as a slave without a slave master. This is a relationship. So in order for this relationship to exist, you have to have two. This is what Lenin referred to as a what is it? A contradiction of a certain kind of mutuality that exists of contradictions, right? Within a contradiction within this kind of mutual relationship. So I was in a meeting yesterday, a really important meeting yesterday. It was one of the more than 20, nearly 30 meetings that happened around the world, including Jamaica and England and South Africa, and then and various other places within the United States as well. International Day of Action, hands off Uhuru, to drop the charges and what have you. And it was a difficult discussion in many ways for me because we were involved in a meeting with incredibly significant and progressive forces from the African community on the one hand. But the big difference was how everybody in the meeting perceived the world and perceived the relationship that we have in this world. And we are, in the African People's Socialist Party, we are historical materialists, which is to say that our analysis of society is based on an investigation of the society itself. Concrete investigation of the society. We want to know about the society, we don't read the Bible. We want to know about the society, we don't go to the Quran. We want to know about the society, we don't call the juju man, the root doctor or something like that. We investigate the society itself. And then when we investigate the society, we can learn some things about it and the relationships in the society. One. Two, when we investigate the society, we don't see it as a static thing, the way things are just like this all the time. We see society, like all things in nature, in fact, as something that's in a constant state of development, that is a coming into being and dying out of being, and in relationship with all other things within that process. That's how we understand it. Otherwise, you end up never going any place at all and trapped with what people like to refer to as common sense. And of course, if you're trapped with common sense, it tells you that the world is flat. Right? You have to be able to know more than that. So I wanted to say that it's really important. So we are dialectical materialists. We are African internationalists. And African internationalism is the means by scientific method by which we investigate and analyze society itself. And that's what historical materialism is all about. So when we say this and we make a criticism of Marx, we recognize, we use the tools that was developed and perfected, well, not perfect, was certainly developed by Marx. Somebody at the door. And what we, using these tools, we can see the errors that were made by Marx. We can see the limitations of Marx and Marxism. Somebody raised a question about how we can make this distinction between Lenin. Lenin, of course, who characterized imperialism as the development of capitalism to its highest stage. He said imperialism is capitalism that has become rotten ripe. It is capitalism developed to its highest stage. It's something born out of capitalism. We disagree with that, and people who have been paying attention to this particular study that's being led by Comrade Jesse up to now would raise the question: how can we disagree with that? How do we say that there's something wrong with that? Because when you look at the word imperialism, it stems from the word empire. Empire. And it was empire that was responsible for the advent of these people who are now characterized as Europe, leaving Europe, going to Africa, going to the Americas, going to Asia and all this. It was empire that sent them out there and initiated the process of colonialism, colonization, and created this whole colonial mode of production. There was no world economy in history until the advent of colonialism, the colonial mode of production. Not that's the advent of colonialism, there was colonialism before. But the thing is that the world economy hooked into a single economy came about as a consequence of this process of colonialism being something that became the main driving force for the development of all human society at that time, as a consequence of the adventures of Europe into the rest of the world. It destroyed feudalism in Europe. That's what destroyed feudalism. It wasn't some natural progression that happened inside Europe. It was colonialism. It was the fact that the queen became less wealthy than the people she was sending out to loot the rest of the world. It was because it was Columbus. Isabella had to borrow money, hawk her jewelry in order to get the funds to send Columbus to what we now call the Americas. And these bandits, these thugs, Hawkins and the rest of them, many of them were pirates, gathered so much money, so much resources, they began to change how Europe looked. They began to create a process for the Industrial Revolution, and all this stuff came as a consequence of that on the one hand, but on the other hand, what was happening to us? What was happening to the indigenous peoples? What was happening to the 50 million people who I understand had died by something like 1619, if I'm not correct, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of that history. All of this, you have this parasitic relationship. It's a relationship that connected us all into a single force. And so when Lenin said that capitalism, that imperialism is capitalism developed to its highest stage, we are saying capitalism is a consequence of imperialism, of empire. And capitalism is imperialism developed, if anything, if you want, empire developed to its highest stage. That's one of the distinctions that we made. So I wanted to and of course, we still want to continue to talk about that kind of thing. And I want to say that we are, as I mentioned earlier, we are historical materialists. And using this method of investigation and analysis, as I said, that was developed by Marx and by Engels and people like that, we have come to different conclusions than they did. Because our starting point is not from Europe and how Europe got developed. Our starting point is the condition of African people. And when we look at the condition of African people as it relates to the emergence and development of capitalism, we come to an entirely different position than they do. And we understand here's the foundation for everything. This is why people like Ho Chi Minh was able to say, when you look at imperialism, when you look in Europe, you're only looking at the tail. The head is in the colonies. This is the crucial question. Colonialism is the crucial question. And others like Ho Chi Minh were able to come to similar kinds of conclusions. And this is the work that from our investigation of our conditions, that is to say, we liberated ourselves to some extent, I believe to a real powerful extent, from the worldview of the colonizer, not in some purely fanatical, not in some purely abstract, unscientific way, but using science. We've come to a different kind of conclusion through investigating, and that's part of what it is that we want to contribute to this discussion. So, and the other thing I want to mention is ultimately, when you look at how the Bolshevik Revolution came into existence, that we're talking about the Russian Revolution, how even the Marxists misunderstand this question, even when they want to talk about it was trade and all these other things that contributed to it. The fact is that the colonizers were fighting among themselves to redivide the world. That's what the first imperialist world war, that was the context within which the Russian Revolution happened, but that was also the context within Marcus Garvey, the struggles of the Sandinistas, Sandino in Nicaragua, the struggle of oppressed peoples around the world. The driving force was the colonial question, where the white countries of the world were talking about how they're going to redivide the world among themselves. 1884-85, when they got together in Berlin, how they're going to redivide Africa among themselves. Garvey said Africa for Africans at home and abroad. But the point is, this is what they were fighting over. So objectively speaking, when Lenin tried to get the communists of Europe to refuse to participate in this predatory war to redivide the world, when he got involved and took power in Russia and said Russia is pulling out of this, objectively speaking, what the Russian Revolution did was align itself with the colonial struggle, with anti-colonial struggles of the peoples of the world, Garvey and the rest of us. That's what happened, objectively speaking. It was the anti-colonial revolution that thrust the Soviets into power, thrust Russia and the Russian Revolution into existence. That's what we want to say. Uhuru.
Uhuru,
That's the point we want to make. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru, and we have a lot of questions that have come in so far that I think will allow you to just even deepen, the points that you just laid out today. But I just really want to salute your leadership and just again express my appreciation for the theory of African internationalism, which is allowing us to understand, all of these different questions, including, just this whole question of like socialism. I often, it's something that we've all encountered, which especially with the U.S. government now, clamping down or more aggressively clamping down on this on socialism and socialists and how it's part of the explanation is that socialism has always been deadly, and all of these, just the condemnation of socialism in the world, and why that could never work, and this becomes a part of a justification of killing and assassinating, imprisoning, and especially the attacks that are being made on our movement and the threat to just neutralize your leadership and the work of this organization, because we are fighting to usher in genuine socialism, but how socialism in the world has never genuinely occurred because of all of these things that you've laid out right now. And anyway, so I just really want to appreciate this discussion, and there are, like I mentioned, our live audience also has really expressed appreciation for the discussion up to now. And I do want to take a look at these questions, but I want to acknowledge.
Let me move it forward just a little bit before
Yes.
you go there.
Yes.
One thing is the African People's Social Party has been in existence for 50 years or more than 50 years. And for much of our existence, if you go back throughout the history of the party, you see us struggling within the African liberation movement itself to fight for a scientific approach to struggle, to fight for ideological and philosophical clarity, to say that this is an absolute necessity. We've engaged in polemics against all kinds of forces. The idea was not just because we want to pick fights with people, but to say, this is how we have to move forward. And you can go through different journals that we've published, different newspapers, and people become profoundly upset with us because we've done that. But the fact is, what we were trying to do is to win our freedom, win our liberation. And you can't do that unless you have some clarity and unless you're able to say, to what end? Okay, so you got great demonstrations, you have great mobilizations, you exposing this and that, but to what end? The end has to be the accomplishment of the capture of power and the destruction of a parasitic social system. And that's the thing that we've been fighting for, and it's not good enough just for you to be good at talking. It's not good enough just for you to get more likes than anybody else got on social media. To what end? To what end is the great demonstration that you're having over here? To what end is the thing that you're doing with the great march mobilization that you're having in Washington, D.C.? What is the strategic objective that you are trying to achieve, and how does that strategic objective relate to the liberation of African people, the liberation and unification of Africa and African people, the destruction of this social system, and the emancipation of the oppressed working peoples of the world? Those are the kinds of questions we're confronted with all the time. Those are big questions, not some tiny question of some struggle that you're having, in that locality where you may be. And that's what every party organization, whether it's in a place like Folkville in small, if you will, township in South Africa, or whether it's in a major center in London, England, or the rest of it, these are the kinds of questions that we're dealing with. So I wanted to make that point. And the other thing I want to say is that it's really important to say that we live in the real world. And just to have great ideas doesn't mean a damn thing if it cannot be applied to the world we live in toward advancing the struggle. We say drop the charges. We say drop the charges against the Uhuru 3, because it's an assault on the African liberation movement here and abroad. But we're not saying this as a threat to anybody, except we say it in the context also of a pending presidential election that's going to happen in the United States. And the presidential election happening in the United States is one that you have sectors of bourgeoisie in a contest with each other for control of the state. And they're trying to win favor, not only with people in the United States, but they have to win favor with people all around the world. This is why Biden had this statement in December of last year, talking to 49 heads of state in African countries, saying something about, we want to apologize for the original sin of what we've done to African people in this country. Why? Because Biden, United States, France, England, the rest of them, they're also now in the contest with a growing Russia influence in the world, a growing Chinese influence in the world. The fact is that they're saying which system is the best system, etc. Come with me, I'll set you free. That's that's kind of the politic they have. What we're saying, the thing that's got us in trouble, is we're saying that I'm already here, I ain't free. And this is a part of the contradiction. So what we are saying is, just in the context of a pending election, that you can't just have a situation where the Democratic Party can continue to get the votes of black people and people who claim to be sympathetic to the interests of black people, because you try to scare us with Trump and the Republican Party. So you don't promise us anything. Give us a black face like a Kamala Harris. Give us a black face like generals who they put in charge of the military forces to maintain the colonial domination of the peoples of the world just because they're black. You don't get nothing from us based on that, or because she's a woman. What you got to do is, what can you do for black people finally? It's not good enough to say, vote for me because I ain't Trump. No. Vote for me because I am somebody who is going to sign an executive order putting reparations on the agenda. Vote for me because I am somebody who is going to change this process that allows them to steal our children with this child protective services and what have you all around the country. Vote for me. Because I am somebody who is going to put control of the police and black communities in the hands of black people. Vote for me. Because I am opposed to what the Justice Department has done historically to the black movement, with Garvey, with Paul Robeson, with W.E.B. Du Bois, with William Patterson, and with the Uhuru 3. That's why you vote for me, and that's what we're saying. Drop the charges. Drop the charges as a part of our participation, legitimate participation, and legitimate so-called electoral process, although we've seen how legitimate it is because they're putting us in jail partially because we participated in the election in 2017 and 2019. Anyway, I just think it's important for us to be able to say that's why we are saying drop the charges, and that it's a part of our intervention in the electoral process. Again, here we go again, in the electoral process again. It's a part of our involvement that gives this government, this social system, an opportunity to say outright that democratic rights are not here for black people, that elections are not here for black people. Either we have it or we don't have it. And it's not me to prove that you have it. It's not for me to prove that America is democratic. It's for you to prove it. Given the historical relationship you have with black people, you still haven't proved it over the hundreds of years that we've lived here. So who's putting whom on trial here? Who's on trial here? That's the question that we're confronted with. And we are calling on the peoples of this country to make a statement that you unite with the ability of African people to participate, and that it's the government is on trial when it and continuously involves itself in an attack on black people just to try to be free. You know, I mean, you can't do that. And some people are crazy enough to really believe. They're really crazy enough to believe that it's possible to open the door to an attack on basic and fundamental democratic rights like free speech. We're just gonna open it in and let it get dim. No, it doesn't work that way. Once that monster gets in the house, it's everybody is a victim. You can't just open it up for us and they never give it back to you. Once they take a freedom from you, they never give it back to you. You have to fight to make sure that they don't take it from you. And if they take it from you, you got to fight like hell to take it back because they ain't going to give it back. People say, look, Trump is out now, but all the policies of Trump still here. It's work. I mean, Obama, what he did in terms of spying on people, the national security thing that took all the information of everybody in the world. Obama intensified it. And he's a so-called Democrat. So, and that's with a big D. All right, so Uhuru. Yeah.
Uhuru, Chairman. Uhuru, right on. I really, really appreciate this. And the comment section is blowing up, fire emojis. And
They're going to indict us now for something. We investigated this and said that 100 and some odd years ago. We didn't just start this discussion.
Right.
We didn't just start this discussion with Putin. And we got fundamental and profound differences with Putin.
Yep.
And the Russian government. We're talking about the Black liberation movement and the struggles of the oppressed peoples around the world. Yep. We're saying what gave Putin existence, which was the struggle of colonial peoples around the world that took Russia from a state of a semi what do you call it, feudal entity. That's what Black people did, and the anti-struggle against colonialism did. So anyway, comrades, I've spoken too much, and I just want to retreat at this moment. Uhuru.
Yeah. Well, I will remind us, this is Omali Taught Me, so it's your show, Chairman. What you will. Uhuru. So let's take a look at some of these questions, Chairman. And first, I want to just acknowledge where people are watching from. We've got Battle Creek, Michigan, St. Louis, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Petersburg, Florida, Texas, Long Island, New York, Marion County, Georgia, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Grenada, West Indies, Bahia, Brazil, South Africa, United Kingdom, Largo, Florida, Lakeland, Florida, Fort Myers, Florida, Chicago, Illinois, San Diego, California, Portland, Oregon, and Huntsville, Alabama, all tuned in with us this morning. So, Uhuru comrades, thank you all for joining us. And also want to acknowledge some donations that have come in over the course of this study. We had Mike with $25, Matum with $20, Comrade Penny Hess with $20, Comrade Syrup C with 50, I believe this might be pounds. And we also had Comrade Elijah with $5. So thank you all so much for your contributions to making this study possible. And our first question will come, also, I'm going to read this comment from Comrade McIndoll, who says, Uhuru, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, I salute you as the leader of the global African Revolution. This is an insightful presentation about the Russian Revolution and its relationship to the growing anti-colonial struggle of the world's colonized peoples. So our first question comes in from Comrade Don on YouTube, says, Uhuru, Chairman, would you compare the bourgeoisie of Russia with the Kuomintang, who we also recently just learned about? Uhuru, Chairman.
Well, the bourgeoisie is, a really horrible entity, and they can be compared to the Kuomintang in the sense that their objective is more or less the same, and that is the domination of the working peoples of the world based on this foundation of colonialism. I think that's what is really important, for us to say, and that the Kuomintang was something that early on fell under the sway of the European colonial powers, and first Japan, and which itself was an imperial power. Many people don't recognize that. That's why this false characterization of peoples of color, some so-called revolutionary had a struggle with us many, many years ago. Some of people who are still alive in our movement will remember this comrade came to Philadelphia for a thing that we were doing on prisoners. And because there was a woman in the Solidarity movement whose mother was Japanese, and out of earshot of the Africans in the party, he was saying, well, why aren't you in the party too? You should be in the party because you are a person of color, and that is, we don't measure anything by a person of color. I'm not a person of color, what the hell is that? So I don't subscribe to that. But those are the kinds of definitions that people use. and they're careless and they're misleading. And some of them are quite deceptive and intentionally utilized to take people off point so that we can't realize what the contradiction is. One of the biggest struggles African people have ever had in the whole world is the struggle of self-identity. I mean, it's a whole, and then you're going to join into it by making me a people of color. At least one time I was a nigga, I knew what the hell that was, but I'm a people of color now, which means that, whatever the hell is that, you understand? And the so-called progressives, use that term. They're being real progressive when they say a people of color. Some of you raised a question, comrade. I know you said, you were talking about the Kuomintang and the Kuomintang and was it the Romanovs, the Russian Revolution. And so, there's that likeness, that they are all collaborators in the oppression of the working peoples of the world. And what is really important for us to understand is that the working peoples of the world, of all of us, including them, function on the pedestal of colonial oppression of everybody. So yeah, we make that. They have the same attitudes, they act the same way. But one of the things that I think that the Europeans are gonna find fascinating in moving forward, especially as these crises deepen, is that peoples have long memories. Despite the fact that the Japanese and they are shaking hands and sleeping in the same bed and everything, do you think Japan has forgotten Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Do you really, really believe that they have forgotten that? You're out of your mind if you think they've forgotten that. You think that the Chinese have forgotten the horrors that have been inflicted and still are inflicted on them, that made it necessary. The Chinese, you unlike Africans in this country, at least the Chinese were able to maintain so deep semblances and connections to their culture, their country, and things like that. They still Chinese. That's why you got a Chinatown here. You have an Africa town that gets bombed. You understand? You have a Move Africa in Philadelphia. It gets bombed. But people don't forget. And so even if the majority forget, there's somebody who remembers. And who around whom the history of the people always attempts to represent itself, to articulate itself. So yeah, the Kuomintang and the Romanovs and all of the rulers of the world have so much in common. They do have things in common, but there's also, in addition to what they have in common, there are contradictions between them too. And that's part of what we're seeing happen. We saw France and the United States for the longest period of time. We're engaged in the most vicious kind of proxy wars all over Africa, but who's going to control parts of Africa? There are contradictions among them as well. And we have to be able to perceive, to understand those contradictions that exist between them so that we can use them to our advantage in terms of trying to move forward. But yeah, they are united, generally speaking, in their requirement for the working peoples of the world to be dominated by capital and the colonial mode of production. I know it was was that Mackendall who raised that, or was somebody else?
No, Chairman, that was Comrade Don.
Uhuru, Comrade Don.
Uhuru. So our next question we're going to take a look at is from Comrade Visto from Namibia, but I believe is currently in South Africa, who is present at the International Day of Action. And Comrade Visto says, Uhuru Chairman, I would like to know whether the reason for the Uhuru 3 fake charges could be because of our party's understanding on where USSR/Russia's position is concerning colonialism, looking at the historic relationship Lenin had with other imperial colonial nations.
I think that the reason, Comrade Visto, and I think you're a perfect person to ask that question, one of the most profound reasons is that the party is where you are. One party is where you are in Namibia, where you are in what they call South Africa, where our party is in the various places around the world where Africans are located, particularly on the continent of Africa. The thing is that the African Revolution is the weak link in the entire colonial capitalist edifice structure. And it's been more than 100 years since we've been able to speak with one voice as for our Africa. That was a magnificent movement that was created by Marcus Garvey, that inspired Nkrumah, that inspired Malcolm X's daddy and Malcolm X himself. That inspired me, that inspired, everybody. Well, I was in Ethiopia and looking at the flag in Ethiopia, and I can see the inspiration of Garvey from, on that flag. I mean, so I think it is the fact that finally, for the first time in 100 years, Africa is being able to speak through one organization, one voice, and being able to pursue what Garvey characterized as one destiny. And especially since the whole social system rests on this foundation. I'm not saying this in some fanciful way. I'm not saying this in terms of we got so much melanin that they got to do this and that. What I'm saying is that we got so much resources, material and human resources. I saw something just the other day, perhaps it was the Washington Post or the New York Times, talking about how there was an opinion about how instead of the group of 7, it doesn't hold water anymore, then should be a group of 3. And the group of 3, from their perspective, is United States and China, which is, real powerful and at minimum, at least the second largest economy, and then India, which has a much larger population than China, which is going to have a larger population in China in the next few years, et cetera. And therefore, that promises all kinds of stuff. They don't even mention Africa. But there are probably more Africans in the world than there are in India. There are Africans, and they talk about 2 billion Africans are going to be in Africa on the continent alone by 2050. So, but they don't count us. And they don't count us because we're not organized, because they split us up and into these little pockets. And then they would lock us in and keep us locked into this ethnic disputes and religious disputes and contradictions around genders and sexuality and et cetera, to keep us off point. But there are enough Africans. And not just are there a lot of us, but the fact is that the world economy requires the resources from Africa to function anything like the level it's functioning on now in terms of efficiency and development. And you're talking about what a powerful labor force we're looking at if this African labor were unleashed and able to unite as one. So that's the contradiction. That's why they just put the United States has put an African as head of the so-called Department of Defense. I got an African over the so-called AFRICOM today. I got an African that they put over the, how do they characterize it? The Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's what got all these black people there, because they have to fight against colonized people. And they want to be able to say it's people of color who are doing this. Right. You can't say it's the white man who's doing this. Look, all these black faces there. And Kamala sent them with a message from Obama. Yeah. But they got all those forces there, Comrade Visto. I think that's the basis for the attack on the African People's Socialist Party. We've resolved the fundamental ideological questions that has split this movement. We have brought the whole world movement back together. We have given white people a re-entry into the process of fighting, of getting rid of this voluntary kind of isolation from the rest of humanity. Separate yourself from the white man. Separate yourself from the colonizer. Join with the rest of us, because colonialism is going to die. And the question is, what side are you going to be on? I'm going to be with my man Dessalines, Kubatet, Bulakai. And that's something that everybody can learn how to say and what to do, so and so, that's the thing that I think, Comrade Visto, I know I over talked it. I have that habit. But Uhuru.
Uhuru Chairman, I just really want to just say that's really powerful. I mean, that, we're under attack because of the fact that there is a comrade like Visto who's able to participate in a discussion like this and is able to build, this organization, this movement, this struggle, in Africa, and how the comrades right now in what's called South African occupied Azania are, building. And part of building is extending the influence of African internationalism, this theory, the way we've explained the world, providing our people with a to what end. That's why we're under attack. And, because you set out a long time ago to say Africa is not going to be up for grabs. If we have anything to do with it, that Africa is going to be, in the possession of Africans ourselves. And just, that's why we're under attack, because we're being successful in that pursuit. And it's something that cannot be stopped. So I just really want to salute your leadership and appreciate that question from Comrade Visto, and just salute the comrades on the continent who are making this work possible. And, just carrying out what it is that you set out to do a long time ago, which is why you went to Africa, which is why you went to Europe, which is why you went to the Caribbean, which is why you've been, everywhere you could possibly go throughout the world to build the struggle. Like you said, you've pulled the process, this movement, back together. And, they are very aware of that, not just aware of it, but they are being challenged by the fact that this process is already underway. And it's something that they, as you said, they're trying to put the brakes on history, but it's impossible. So that's what we're looking at. And again, thank you, comrades, for that question. And I think we have time for one more question. This is coming from Comrade Diop, who asks, Uhuru, can you speak to the distinctions, if any, that exist between free speech in revolutionary society and in under colonial society?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Comrade Diop, because our struggle is to really emancipate speech, make it possible for people to participate in society. You can't have that in an unequal society. If the society is constructed on inequality, then you got to keep quiet those who would are being exploited and oppressed. You can't let those oppressed people and exploited people run around talking about their exploitation and their oppression. That undermines the whole system. So the thing that we are fighting for is the emancipation of speech, the emancipation of people being able to be together. Some people try to solve the problem, the easy way. That's what integrationists try to do, by the way. They want to solve the problem the easy way. So we're going to solve the problem because my relationship, I've got a special relationship and I'm in love, I got this marriage. You're looking for the easy way. The thing is that it's a social contradiction we're confronted with. Society has to be liberated. And we have to be able to identify what are the critical points in this process. Our movement, the African People's Socialist Party, African Internationalism, the genuine struggle to bring socialism into existence is to bring the people, and especially the workers who produce life. No, you don't have a capitalist producing life. Only thing Biden produces is facelifts. I knew I'd think of something. You understand? Yeah. But working people produce life. Would be no life without working people, the most despised and trampled on and spat upon people. The ones who Biden is preparing to double cross right now in this phony so-called debt ceiling crisis, where they're going to act like it's poor people who they're starving to death, who are taking money from the budget, therefore make them work. But make them work for it. Hell, we tired, Biden. We've been working all this time, Biden. You get a job, Biden. Hunter should get a job, Biden. Saying we got to get a job. Where the hell you been? And so now the poor people got to figure out, and Biden is making a great compromise because he's not going to make people work as hard as the Republicans want people to work. This is what they're talking. You know that, right? Yeah. This is what they are talking about. So in the meantime, they're sending all your reparations money to Ukraine. I should say that. I should say to the military, to the Pentagon, that has to keep wars and threats of wars going on so that this bourgeoisie who are tied to this industry can continue to get fat, make more and more money off of it. So anyway, Diop, I just want to say, the free speech they're talking about is different from the free speech we are talking about. Free speech we are talking about is open up the gates so that the masses of people have access to our own capacity to change the world in a way that serves the interests of the people. And we can tolerate free speech, but the oppressor can never tolerate free speech. They cannot tolerate free speech. They'll close down your schools. They'll burn your books. They'll do all these other things so that the oppressed people cannot have access to discussion. So we want freedom of speech. That's why we fight so hard for it. That's why we recognize if we allow them to get away with this, they can shut down everything. If people like to talk about McCarthyism and how there was going to be fascism under McCarthy, and what kept it from happening wasn't a struggle against fascism. It was a struggle for freedom that was being led by Black people, by Fannie Lou Hamer, by those people who were working throughout this country, Black people. That's the thing that kept everything open up. Because the struggle against fascism was just a contest that's going on between the colonizers themselves. It's just like an election in this country. This boss against that boss. Which boss you like the best? You understand? Anyway, I've spoken too long. Yes, there's a distinction between the free speech of African internationalism and a revolutionary socialist society and the free speech of the bourgeoisie. And our struggle for free speech is a movement toward that freedom. And our struggle for democracy is a movement toward that freedom. When we say democracy, what we are saying is the highest expression of democracy is what? Self-determination. How the hell are you going to say you got democracy when you got a whole country of people who are enslaved, a whole world of people who are enslaved? You want democracy, then you have to get out of the way of self-determination. To get democracy, the people are going to have to push you out of the way of self-determination. Thank you, Comrade Director Uhuru. Thank you, Diop Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, Chairman, and Uhuru, Comrade Diop, thank you for your question. That's going to be our last question for today as we wind down in the time. But want to thank Comrade Syrup C, who just donated another 10 pounds to the study this morning. So thank you, and Uhuru, salute to Comrade Syrup C and everyone who's made contributions to the study today, and also contributions through watching, sharing, and asking your questions. So as we near the end of the study, we'd like to ask for closing remarks, but I want to see, we did have a brilliant overview that was presented by Comrade Jesse Nevel, who's still in the room with us. So wanted to see, Comrade Jesse, did you want to, did you have any closing remarks before we turn it over to the chairman?
Please, Jesse.
Uhuru. Well, all I can close with is say just salute to Chairman Amalia Shatella and salute the African People's Socialist Party, you, Director Akile, the Department of Agitprop, and this incredible, living, breathing, dynamic, revolutionary philosophy of African internationalism. It's a theory of practice that the title of this presentation was The Russian Revolution Through the Lens of African Internationalism. And that's a lens that really lets you see the truth and see the world as it really is and see the future. So just an incredible honor to be a part of this presentation. And thank you so much, Chairman, for your leadership and your analysis and making it possible for us to understand what's happening in the world, the history, and the way forward under the leadership of the African working class. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Yes, I just want to unite and say that, we're optimistic about the future, and it's because of the theory of African internationalism that we can be, where, as the chairman said, Joe Biden, the only thing he can produce is faceless. But also, and that's what this whole system is in the process of doing. lift his face and other things off the floor. But the thing is also that it produces just total despair for what the future will look like, under this social system. The ship is sinking. And, what we're doing now is we're getting on the Black Star steamship line and heading towards freedom. So thank you so much, Comrade Jesse, for participating in this study today for that overview. And now I want to turn it over to you, Chairman, for closing remarks before we wrap up today.
Uhuru, I just want to unite with your observations about the significance of Comrade Jesse's participation. He did an incredible amount of work pulling together this history, this PowerPoint, this discussion. And I don't want to downplay that, and I don't think anybody should downplay that, nor the participation of the solidarity movement in this struggle. We talk about the solidarity movement, but what we characterize as the solidarity movement, I really believe is an important advancement in the struggle for the revolutionary, for the working class of the world, and for Africa and the African Revolution. It has knocked down those false barriers of racism and all this other kind of stuff that put white people in the center of the world and continues to make it impossible for them to see the world, which is one of the contradictions that Marx was faced with. He couldn't see us, he couldn't see the world. And as long as the world is perceived simply through the lenses of the colonizer, it becomes impossible. And so now what we've done through the party is we've broken that down, and it's not just a discussion either. One of the things we learned early on, that it's not enough just to proclaim solidarity, it's practical. It's what you do in practice. It's changing the world. And in the process of changing the world, we become changed as human beings. That's the driving force for our transformation as human beings, for our development as human beings. And so that's one of the things that we have been able to contribute to. So I want to thank you. I really want to just send a special shout out also to our dear comrades and brothers and sisters, especially on the continent of Africa. Without you, without the comrades in Haiti, without the comrades in Jamaica and Bermuda, in Nassau, Trinidad, and throughout the Caribbean, African internationalism is not real. It is you and what you do that gives it life and vitality. And the fact of the matter is, it is what you do there and what you do in Europe. We've given the African Revolution a real life. Africans in Europe don't have to just sit around and be some kind of supporters of the African revolutionary movement. You can make the revolution where you are as a consequence of being a part of the African internationalism movement. So I want to thank all of you for this participation, and especially, as I said, on the continent of Africa itself. Great work, great work. The mobilization, I think we're having one in London today, aren't we? Is it today where we have was that yesterday? That was yesterday at the U.S. Embassy. Today we have a great mobilization that's going to be in Philadelphia, in St. Petersburg, Florida. Today there's African Liberation Day mobilization happening here in St. Louis at our regular mass meeting at 3 o'clock Central Time. So just keep pushing this struggle, and just want to thank everybody for all of the work that you do. And you, Comrade Director, a special shout out to as well. Uhuru.
Uhuru is on the move, Chairman. Uhuru comrades, thank you all so much for tuning in to this incredible discussion that we've been able to have. And also shout out to the Omali Taught Me Show team for helping to produce this entire program today. And just a reminder to follow the chairman on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. I want to close out by saying, drop the charges against the Uhuru 3, defend the right to freedom of speech, hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. Comrades, we are winning. Uhuru.